On the day I should have been celebrating my father, he and my older brother locked me in the bedroom. "Let's play a special game," they said with drunken voices. It only stopped when my mother shouted, "The police are here," words that saved what remained of my childhood. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my dear friends. How wonderful it is to chat with you, even through this little screen. I'm Matilda Moore, but everyone here in the Riverside neighborhood of Portland, Oregon, knows me as Grandma Tilly. I've completed my 75 years, you know? I was born in a small fishing village in Maine on the rocky Atlantic coast, where the sea crashes against the shore and the air smells of salt. These days, I lead a simple life here in my little yellow house with blue shutters, just a short walk from Riverside Park. Every morning, I wake up to the sound of robins that have made a nest in the apple tree in my backyard. I prepare my morning coffee, a tradition I've grown to love since moving to Oregon, and sit on the porch to watch the sunrise. I have my household routine that I've developed over the years. Mondays are for washing clothes, Tuesdays for ironing. On Wednesdays, I go to the farmer's market to buy fresh vegetables for the week. Thursdays are my favorite day when I host my knitting group. We're 6 ladies who gather to knit and talk about life. We call ourselves the Wisdom Needles. Each blanket, each sweater we make carries stories and memories from our lives. In winter, we donate what we produce to the senior center in the East Side neighborhood. In summer, we knit for the children at the downtown orphanage. I'm sitting now in my favorite corner of the house, my blue velvet armchair that my late husband, Thomas, gave me as a gift when we celebrated 30 years of marriage. Beside me, I have a cup of chamomile tea and my cat Romeo sleeping on the crochet rug I made last winter. It's from here that I chat with you all. Before I continue with my story, I'd like to ask a little favor. If these words from an old grandma like me are touching your heart, please leave your like and subscribe to the channel. It's a way to let me know I'm being good company. And tell me something in the comments. Which town are you watching me from right now? And what time is it there? Are you having your morning coffee, an afternoon tea, or is it already dinner time? I always read all the comments and feel so happy to know a little bit about who's on the other side. Tell me this, okay? Let's create a chain of affection between us. You know, there are certain dates that for many people are cause for joy and togetherness, but for others might awaken difficult memories. Father's Day is one of those dates for me. For a long time, just hearing the commercials on television would cause my body to respond with trembling, a tightness in my chest that wouldn't let me breathe properly. Today, I want to share with you a difficult story, painful even, but one that also carries a message of overcoming. It wasn't easy to get to where I am now, to conquer the fears, the shame, and the nightmares that accompanied me for so many years, but I'm here, aren't I? And if I managed to rebuild my life after so much suffering, I believe other people can too. I'll go back a bit in time to that little girl I was in Maine when I still believed the world was a safe place. I was born in 1950 in Rockport, one of the oldest and most traditional places in coastal Maine. Our house was on a small dirt road that went down to the sea, a simple wooden construction painted blue with white windows, as was common in the New England architecture of the region. From the backyard, we could see the bay, and, on clear days, we could even see the fishermen's boats coming and going with their nets full of cod, haddock, and lobster. My father, Leonard Moore, was a fisherman like most men in that community. A strong man, with skin weathered by sun and salt, hands calloused from pulling nets. He had an angular face, gray eyes like the sea on a stormy day, and a beard that was always stubbly. When he was sober, he was quiet, spoke little, but moved with the elegance of someone who knows every secret of the sea. But as soon as whiskey entered him, he transformed into a completely different person, with a look that seemed not to recognize me as his daughter. My mother, Julia Cooper, was a lace maker. From her skilled hands came the most beautiful lace in the region, an art she learned from her grandmother, who in turn had learned from the first European women who arrived in New England. She was a small woman with black hair, always in a bun, attentive brown eyes, and hands that never stopped. She had fair skin, freckles on her face, and a gentle voice that hummed old folk songs while working with her bobbins, creating lace that we sold to tourists who were beginning to discover the beauties of our coastline. We were 5 siblings. I was the 4th, preceded by Arnold, 11 years older than me, Anna, 9 years older, and Ellie, who was 5 years ahead of me. After me came only Tommy, 3 years younger, who from an early age showed a sensitivity and sweetness that my father considered sissy stuff. His words, not mine. Our house was small for so many people. It had only 2 bedrooms, one for my parents and another where we, the children, squeezed into 2 large beds. I slept with my sisters, while Arnold and Tommy shared the other bed. The living room also served as a workspace for my mother, with her lace pillow always ready in a corner. The kitchen had a wood stove that heated the entire house on cold winter days, and a gas stove that we only used on special occasions to save money. In the backyard, we had a vegetable garden, some chickens, and a large apple tree that provided shade on hot summer days. The days in my childhood had a rhythm marked by the sea and the seasons. We woke up at the first light of day. While my mother lit the wood stove for coffee, I helped feed the chickens and water the garden. Then I would sweep the yard before going to school. I studied at St. Mary's Elementary, an old building next to the church of the same name, about a 20-minute walk from our house. In the afternoons, when there was no school, I helped my mother sort threads for her lace or took care of Tommy, who was still small. When there was time left, I played with the other neighborhood children on the beach. We made sandcastles, swam in the calm waters of the bay, and invented stories about hidden treasures and fantastic beings that, according to legends told by the elders, inhabited the coast. Rockport in the 1950s was a place where everyone knew each other. The colorful houses in colonial style, a heritage of the Europeans who colonized the region, lined up along the main road. St. Mary's Church, built in 1806, was the center of community life. There, Sunday masses, religious festivals like the 4th of July, and weddings took place. The square in front of the church was the stage for local dances, music, and folk theater. My best friend was Celeste, the daughter of the school teacher. She had red hair, freckles on her face, and a laugh that infected everyone. We two were inseparable. Together we explored the hidden corners of the beach, collected seashells and starfish, and shared secrets under the pier where the fishermen tied their boats. Our financial situation was always uncertain, like that of many fishing families. There were good times, like during cod season between May and July, when my father brought home not only abundant fish, but also some money from selling the surplus. On these occasions, my mother made salted cod, a traditional dish that consisted of opening the fish, salting it, and letting it dry in the sun. The strong smell of drying fish permeated the entire neighborhood. But there were also periods of scarcity, especially when the sea was too rough for boats to go out or when fishing was poor. In these moments, we depended more on the income my mother got from her lace and the small garden we kept in the backyard. Sometimes Arnold, who started working very early as a fisherman's helper, contributed some money. Sundays were special days. We woke up early to go to Mass at St. Mary's Church. I wore my only good dress, sewn by my mother, and Tommy wore pants and a shirt that had been Arnold's, adjusted to fit him. After Mass, when the weather was good, we had a picnic on the beach. My mother prepared cornbread, another recipe from our New England tradition. And sometimes, if we were lucky, we ate fresh lobster that my father had caught the day before. It was around the age of 8 that I began to notice changes in my father's and Arnold's behavior. Alcohol, which had always been a constant presence in our house, began to consume more and more of my father. He would come home late, staggering, with the strong smell of whiskey emanating from his pores. Instead of going straight to bed, as he used to do, he started staying in the living room, watching my mother work, making increasingly cruel comments about how she was good for nothing, how we were lucky to have him to put food on the table. Arnold, who by that time was already 19 years old, began to follow in his father's footsteps. He would come home drunk, with the same murky look that scared me and my father. And both began to look at me differently, in a way that, even as a child, I knew was not how a father and brother should look at a girl. My mother noticed. She began to keep me always nearby when they were at home. She invented tasks to keep me busy away from them. She sent me to Celeste's house when she knew they would arrive drunk. "Girl, you have to be careful," she would say in a low voice, while teaching me to make lace, without ever explaining exactly what I should protect myself from. Anna and Ellie, my older sisters, were already spending less time at home. Anna started dating early and at 17 married a young man from Portsmouth, a neighboring town, and went to live there. Ellie got a job as a maid in the home of a rich family in downtown Portland and only returned home on weekends. So, often it was just me, Tommy, my mother, and the two men of the house, increasingly unpredictable as the drinking increased. When I turned 10, I received a gift from my mother, a cloth doll made by herself, with clothes from lace scraps. I called her Hope, because the smile embroidered on her face gave me comfort on nights when my father's shouting wouldn't let me sleep. Tommy, always sensitive, made a small bed for her from a box lined with pieces of fabric left over from my mother's sewing. At school, I was a dedicated student. I loved English classes and the stories that teacher Margaret, Celeste's mother, told about distant places and extraordinary people. I dreamed of being a teacher like her, to be able to teach other children and, maybe one day, leave that place that, although beautiful, was beginning to feel too small for my dreams. It was Miss Margaret who first noticed the purple marks on my arm, the result of a day when I couldn't get out of my father's way when he came staggering home. "What happened, Matilda?" she asked with concerned eyes. "I fell from the apple tree," I lied, repeating the excuse my mother had taught me to give. At 10, I began to help my mother sell lace to tourists who came to visit Rockport. We set up a small table in the church square on Sundays, and I would stay there explaining to visitors how the lace was made, showing the different patterns. It was a job that gave me pride and also allowed me to practice being articulate when talking to strangers, something that would be useful years later. When I was 11, a great storm hit the coast. The sea invaded several houses near the beach, including ours. We lost furniture, clothes, and most devastating for my mother, a good part of her lace already prepared for sale. It was a period of even more scarcity and tension. My father, frustrated with the loss, drank more and shouted more. My mother sewed day and night to replace what had been lost. I, increasingly, felt the weight of a threat that I couldn't name, but that hovered over our house, like the dark clouds that had brought the storm. Arnold, by that time 22 years old, was increasingly similar to my father, not only physically, tall, strong, with the same hard look, but also in temperament. He drank as much as him and had the same fits of anger. But there was something more in Arnold, a calculated cruelty that my father, in his more direct brutality, did not possess. He liked to scare me, to corner me in parts of the house when there was no one around, to make comments about how I was becoming a pretty young lady. Each time this happened, I would run to my mother, to Tommy, or escape to Celeste's house. In early 1962, when I was almost 12, the calendar marked the third Sunday in June, Father's Day. It was a date we didn't celebrate much at home. There was no money for gifts, and my father never seemed to care about family celebrations. But that year, my teacher had us make cards for our fathers at school. I sat in the last desk, watching my classmates draw colorful hearts and write affectionate messages while looking at the blank paper in front of me, not knowing what to write for a man whose heavy steps on the porch made me tremble. Father's Day of 1962 dawned with a fine mist covering Rockport, something common at that time of year. The sea was calm, almost still, reflecting the gray sky like a foggy mirror. I woke up early, as always, and helped my mother prepare breakfast. That Sunday, she had made cornbread, a type of thin pancake made from cornmeal, typical of New England cuisine, which we ate with maple syrup. "Your father came home late last night," my mother said in a low voice while setting the table. "He and Arnold drank a lot at Mr. Quinn's store. Better let them sleep in." There was a concern in her look that I knew well. It was the same look she had when she knew a storm was coming, but could do nothing to prevent it. That morning we went to the 8 o'clock Mass, just me, my mother, and Tommy. Ellie had come from Portland to spend the weekend, but decided to stay home to prepare a special lunch, baked fish with potatoes, my father's favorite food. "It's Father's Day, after all," she said, always trying to please, always believing that a kind gesture could change my father's nature. In church, the priest spoke about Saint Joseph, the father of Jesus, about how he was an example of protection and love for the family. I looked at the other children around me, many holding letters and drawings to give to their fathers after Mass. The card I had made at school was folded in my dress pocket, crumpled and slightly torn. I hadn't been able to write anything on it except Happy Father's Day, and even those 3 words seemed false in my uncertain handwriting. When we returned home, my father and Arnold were already awake, sitting on the front porch with bitter expressions that showed the hangover from the night before. Tommy, who at the time was only 9 years old, ran to my father and handed him a drawing he had made. A colorful fishing boat with my father's name written on the side. "What's this, boy?" asked my father, taking the paper with clumsy fingers. "It's a present, Dad. Happy Father's Day," replied Tommy, with that innocent smile that always broke my heart. My father looked at the drawing for a moment, then folded it and put it in his shirt pocket. He didn't thank him, didn't smile, but he also didn't tear it up or throw it away, which for us was already a small victory. "And you, Matilda, don't you have anything for your father?" asked Arnold, fixing on me that look that gave me shivers. The question sounded like a veiled threat. I hesitated, my hand instinctively going to the pocket where the card was. But before I could answer, my mother intervened. "She helped Ellie prepare the special lunch for you. That's her gift." My father grunted something unintelligible and stood up, entering the house toward the kitchen. Arnold remained seated, watching me with a smile at the corner of his lips that made my stomach turn. Lunch proceeded in a tense atmosphere. My father and Arnold drank whiskey while eating, which was never a good sign. Ellie tried to fill the silence by talking about her work in the rich family's house, about how her employer had given her an almost new dress that no longer fit her. My mother responded with monosyllables, keeping her eyes low, while I played with the food on my plate, unable to swallow anything. Tommy, sensitive as always, sensed the tension and, as soon as he finished eating, asked permission to go play at the neighbor's house. My father nodded, and I felt a pang of envy as I watched my little brother escape that suffocating environment. After lunch, Ellie offered to wash the dishes, and my mother went to help her. I was left alone in the living room with my father and Arnold, who continued drinking, now from a bottle of whiskey that Arnold had bought at the store. Television was still a rarity at that time, especially in places like Rockport, so there was nothing to distract their attention from me. "Come here, daughter," called my father, patting the sofa next to him. "Today is Father's Day, and you still haven't given me a hug." I instinctively looked toward the kitchen, seeking my mother with my eyes. She had her back turned, busy with the dishes, but something in the way her shoulders stiffened told me she was attentive to the conversation. Reluctantly, I approached the sofa. Maybe it was just a hug, I thought. Maybe, because it was Father's Day, he was trying to be nice. But as soon as I sat down, I felt his heavy arm around my shoulders, pulling me closer. The smell of whiskey and sweat was so strong, it made me nauseous. "You're becoming a pretty young lady, Matilda," he said, his voice slurred by alcohol. "You're almost at the age to marry." "She's still very young, Dad," said Arnold. But his tone was not one of protection. There was something predatory in the way he looked at me. "But she is getting pretty indeed." He laughed. My father laughed, a harsh sound that made me shudder. "Yeah, but her mother is no good anymore. She's old and worn out." I tried to move away, but his arm held me firmly. I need to help in the kitchen," I stammered, feeling the panic grow. "The women are taking care of that," replied my father. "You stay here with us. We're going to teach you some things every young lady needs to know." It was then that Arnold got up and went to the front door, turning the key in the lock with a click that sounded like a sentence. The panic inside me transformed into pure terror. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice almost disappearing from fear. "Come here, daughter," called my father again, but now his voice had a different, darker intonation. "Today is a day for a special gift." Arnold returned to the living room and positioned himself behind me, his heavy hands landing on my shoulders, pushing me lightly toward my father. I tried to break free, but he was much stronger. "Don't be afraid," said Arnold, his voice strangely soft, as if he were talking to a frightened animal. "It's just a family game, isn't it, Dad?" My father nodded, his eyes clouded by alcohol, but with a terrible lucidity in what they intended. "Every father deserves special affection on his day," he said, opening his arms. "Come give your dad a hug, little Tilly." I took a step back, but Arnold's hands held me firmly. "Come on, don't be rude," he whispered in my ear. "It's just a hug." I knew it wasn't just a hug. My father's hands had never been gentle with me. Either they hit hard when he was angry, or they touched in a way that made me feel dirty when he was drunk. And now, trapped in that room with my mother in the kitchen and Arnold as an accomplice, the fear I felt was different from any other. "I don't want to," I managed to say, my voice almost disappearing in my dry throat. My father's face hardened. "You don't want to? After everything I do for you, after working in the sun and rain to put food on this table?" He stood up, his imposing figure filling my field of vision. "You will, yes. It's the least you can do for your father on his day." "And for your older brother, too," added Arnold, squeezing my shoulders harder, "who also takes care of you." A tear ran down my face. In desperation, I did the only thing I could think of. I screamed for my mother with all the strength of my lungs. "Mom! Mom! Help me!" I heard the sound of dishes breaking in the kitchen, followed by hurried steps. My father cursed and advanced to grab me, but I dodged, slipping under his arms. Arnold tried to hold me, but I managed to bite his hand hard enough for him to release me, screaming in pain. My mother appeared at the kitchen door at the exact moment my father caught me again, holding my arm with such force that I felt he could break it. Her face, normally submissive, was transformed. There was a fury there that I had never seen before. "Let her go, Leonard," she shouted, advancing into the living room. "Shut up and go back to the kitchen, woman," roared my father without releasing me. "This is none of your business." "None of my business? She's my daughter," replied my mother. And there was a tremor in her voice that was not of fear, but of contained anger. "Release her now, or you'll regret it." My father laughed, a cruel sound that made my blood freeze. "And what are you going to do? Hit me with the broom?" He pulled me closer, and I could smell the sour scent of whiskey on his breath. "Come on, Arnold. Let's take her to the bedroom. We have more privacy there." That's when it happened. My mother, that small and apparently fragile woman, ran to the front window and flung it open. "Stop!" she shouted, with a voice that didn't seem to be hers. "The police are here!" The effect was instantaneous. My father and Arnold froze. The mention of the police was something serious. Fishermen like them, who often smuggled small goods or fished in prohibited areas, had an instinctive fear of authorities. "What police, woman? Are you crazy?" asked my father, but there was uncertainty in his voice. "I called yesterday," lied my mother with surprising conviction. "After you two went out to drink, I spoke with Sergeant Matthews, the one who always comes to inspect the fishing. I told him everything you were planning to do with Matilda. He said he would come today, right at this time." It was a lie, of course. There was no telephone in our house, nor in almost any house in Rockport at that time. And Sergeant Matthews, although he was a known figure in the region, had never entered our house. But my mother spoke with such firmness, with such certainty, that for a moment even I believed it. Arnold was the first to react. Always smarter, more calculating than my father, he ran to the window and looked outside. "I don't see anyone," he said, but there was concern in his voice. "They're at Mr. Quinn's store," insisted my mother. I told them to meet us there because I knew you would do this today. They must be coming here at this exact moment." My father looked at her for a long moment, trying to decide if she was bluffing. Then he looked at me, still grabbed by the arm, tears streaming down my face. Something in his look changed. I don't know if it was shame, fear, or just the instinct of self-preservation. He released me and took a step back. "You're crazy, Julia," he said, but his voice no longer had the same certainty. "Completely crazy." I took advantage of the moment to run to my mother's side, who hugged me protectively. Ellie appeared at the kitchen door, pale and frightened, not completely understanding what was happening. "If you touch her again," said my mother with a calmness that contrasted with the trembling of her body, "I swear to God that not only will I call the police, but I'll tell everyone in the community, the priest, the church ladies, the fishermen. Everyone will know what kind of men you are." The threat of public exposure seemed worse than the police. In a small community like Rockport, where everyone knew each other, reputation was everything. Even among violent and alcoholic men like my father and Arnold, there were certain limits that, if publicly crossed, would mean complete ostracism. My father grabbed the whiskey bottle from the table and took a long swig. "Let's get out of here, Arnold," he finally said. "This house is full of crazy women." "But Dad," Arnold began, still looking at me in a way that made me want to disappear. "Now," ordered my father, already heading to the door. "We'll settle this later." They left, slamming the door with such force that the windows shook. As soon as we were alone, my mother collapsed in a chair, her entire body trembling. Ellie ran to her side, still not fully comprehending what had happened. "Mom, what was that? Why did you lie about the police?" My mother didn't respond immediately. She pulled me close, examining my face, my arms, as if looking for signs of injuries. "Did they hurt you? Did they do anything to you?" I didn't answer, tears still flowing. "You arrived in time." She hugged me tightly, and I could feel her heart beating uncontrollably. "Thank God," she murmured. "Thank God." Then, looking at Ellie, she said with a firmness that admitted no questioning, "Pack some clothes for you and for Matilda, just the essentials. We're leaving here now." "Leave for where?" asked Ellie, confused. "Anywhere away from them," replied my mother. "It's no longer safe to stay here." "But Mom, what about Tommy? And our things?" "We'll get Tommy from the neighbor's house right now," interrupted my mother. "As for the things, we'll only take what we can carry. The rest doesn't matter." It was then that I understood. We weren't just leaving for a few hours or days to give my father time to calm down, as had happened a few times in the past. We were truly fleeing, leaving behind the only house and the only life I had known. In less than an hour, we had packed the essentials: a few changes of clothes, the lace my mother had made to sell, the savings passbook where she kept the little money she managed to hide from my father, and some personal items, like the Hope doll, which I couldn't leave behind. We got Tommy, who was frightened by the haste and few explanations, but trusted us enough not to ask too many questions. We took the bus to Portland in the late afternoon. My mother remained tense throughout the journey, constantly looking out the window, as if expecting to see my father and Arnold chasing us. But they were probably still at the store, drowning their anger and frustration in more whiskey. "Where are we going, Mom?" I asked when we were already on the bus, Tommy asleep on my lap, Ellie sitting in silence beside me. "To Cousin Olivia's house in Boston," she replied, keeping her voice low so other passengers wouldn't hear. "She wrote to me a few months ago saying that if we needed help, we could look for her." "And we'll never go back home?" I asked, my voice small in the bustle of the bus. My mother looked at me for a long moment, her eyes reflecting a mixture of pain, determination, and something that seemed to be hope. "That was no longer our home, Matilda," she finally said. "It wasn't a safe place for you or for any of us." "Because of Dad and Arnold," I stated. Not as a question, but as a fact that I was finally admitting to myself. "Yes," she replied simply, "because of them." "What did they want to do to me, Mom?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer at some instinctive, primitive level. My mother exchanged a look with Ellie, who was now crying silently beside me. Then, turning to me, she said, "Things that no father or brother should want to do with a daughter or sister. Things that I will not allow to happen to you, even if I have to face the rough sea and the devil himself." That night, as the bus followed the dark road toward Portland, from where we would take another bus to Boston the next day, I let the tears finally fall. I cried for the house we had left behind, for the life we knew, and even in a complicated way that I couldn't fully understand, for the father who should have protected me, but from whom I had to flee. But there was also, mixed with sadness, a strange feeling of pride in my mother. That small and apparently fragile woman, who for years had endured my father's abuses in silence, had found a strength that I didn't know she possessed. She had lied, bluffed, and risked everything to protect me, to protect us. I fell asleep with my head on her shoulder, lulled by the movement of the bus, holding the hope doll against my chest. And I dreamed of Boston, a city I had never seen, but that represented something new, something different, a place where perhaps we could start again. The journey to Boston was long and tiring. We spent one night in a cheap boarding house in downtown Portland, saving what little money we had for the bus tickets. My mother remained vigilant, constantly checking if my father or Arnold had followed us. Her hands, so skilled when working with lace bobbins, were now always restless, squeezing the wooden rosary her grandmother had given her, or counting the few dollar bills hidden in a small pouch sewn inside the lining of her purse. At the bus station, waiting for the bus to Boston, Tommy, at 9 years old, pulled me aside and asked in a low voice, "Matilda, why are we running away? What did Dad and Arnold do?" I looked into those innocent eyes, so similar to mine, and didn't know what to answer. How to explain something that I myself barely understood. How to put into words the violence that had almost happened. The predatory look on the face of our own father? "They did bad things, Tommy," I finally replied. "And they were going to do worse things." "What kind of things?" he insisted, always curious. "The kind of things that fathers and brothers shouldn't do," I said, repeating my mother's words. "Someday, when you're older, maybe we can talk about it." He seemed to accept my answer, at least for now. We returned to my mother and Ellie, who were counting coins to buy some bread and bananas for the trip. Money was so scarce that we couldn't afford to buy food on the road. We finally boarded the bus to Boston. The journey lasted almost a full day, with stops in Portsmouth, Salem, and other towns. At each new city, new passengers got on, and my mother examined each male face with apprehension, fearing to see my father or Arnold. Ellie, always the emotionally strongest of the four of us, tried to keep spirits up, telling stories or proposing guessing games to distract Tommy. We arrived in Boston on a gray winter afternoon. The bus station was crowded, and I immediately felt the impact of the big city. The noise, the crowd, the fast pace, so different from the quiet life in Rockport. People spoke differently, with an accent I had never heard, and wore heavier clothes because of the intense cold, something we weren't used to on the coast of Maine. "How will we find Cousin Olivia?" asked Ellie, adjusting her backpack and holding Tommy's hand so he wouldn't get lost in the crowd. "I sent a telegram from Portland," replied my mother, looking around anxiously. "She said she would be waiting for us." We waited for almost 2 hours, sitting on hard, uncomfortable wooden benches, our few bags at our feet. The fatigue of the journey weighed on us, and Tommy had already fallen asleep on Ellie's lap when a short woman with graying hair and round glasses approached. "Julia," she called, looking at my mother with uncertain eyes. "Julia Cooper?" My mother jumped up, relief stamped on her exhausted face. "Olivia, thank God you came." The two embraced, and I could see that, although they were cousins, they probably hadn't seen each other for decades. Olivia then looked at us, her eyes widening slightly as she realized there were 3 children, and not just one, as she might have expected. "And these are the little ones?" she asked, a slight tone of concern in her voice. "Yes," replied my mother. "This is Matilda, whom you met when she was a baby. This is Ellie, the oldest who was still at home, and this is Tommy, the youngest. Olivia smiled, but I could notice a hesitation in her look. Her house probably wasn't big enough to accommodate so many people. Still, she showed no intention of sending us away. "Welcome to Boston," she said, helping to pick up our bags. "Let's go home. You must be exhausted." Olivia's house was in the North End, an old neighborhood of Boston, with modest houses and narrow streets. It was a small construction, with only 2 bedrooms, a living room that also served as a kitchen, and a backyard where she grew herbs and some vegetables. We were many for such a limited space, but at that moment, any shelter seemed like a luxury. "You can have the back room," said Olivia, showing a room where there was only a double bed and an old wardrobe. "I sleep in the other bedroom." "It's not much, but it's clean and safe." "It's more than enough, Olivia," replied my mother, gratitude evident in her voice. "I don't know how to thank you for receiving us like this, without notice." That night, we all slept squeezed into the same bed. My mother, me, Ellie, and Tommy. We were so tired that we didn't even mind the discomfort. The important thing was that we were together and away from the danger that my father and Arnold represented. In the first days, my mother told Olivia a simplified version of our escape. She said that my father drank a lot, that he was violent, but she didn't mention the attempted abuse. Only later, when we children were sleeping, did I hear the two talking in low voices in the kitchen. My mother finally revealed the whole truth. "My God, Julia!" exclaimed Olivia, horrified. "His own father and brother. What monsters!" "That's why I had to run away," replied my mother. "I've seen what happens to girls when the men in the family lose respect, and I wasn't going to let that happen to my Matilda." The first weeks in Boston were extremely difficult. The money my mother had brought ran out quickly, and Olivia, despite her goodwill, was not in a condition to support 4 people besides herself. She worked as a seamstress in a small clothing factory in the city center, earning just enough for her own needs. My mother soon began to look for work. Without formal education and without knowing anyone in the city, the options were limited. She ended up getting a job as a laundress in a rich family's house in the Beacon Hill neighborhood. The work was heavy, washing sheets, towels, underwear by hand, and the pay miserable. She would leave before dawn and return after dusk, her fingers raw from water and caustic soap. Ellie, who already had experience as a domestic worker in Portland, also found work quickly. She was hired as a kitchen helper in a restaurant near Faneuil Hall. She worked many hours for little money, but at least she could bring home the leftover food that would be thrown away, which helped feed our family. As for me and Tommy, the initial plan was for us to continue studying. My mother insisted that education was our only hope for a better future. We were enrolled in a public school near Olivia's house, but the adaptation was extremely difficult. We didn't know anyone. Our main accent was a cause for jokes, and I soon realized that we were very behind compared to the other students. The education in Rockport was not comparable to that in the capital. In addition, there was the problem of school supplies, uniforms, books. Everything cost money that we didn't have. Many times we went to school without the necessary materials, which left us even more marginalized. The financial difficulties intensified when about 3 months after our arrival, Olivia became seriously ill. It started with a persistent cough that wouldn't improve. Then came the chest pains, shortness of breath, extreme weakness. The doctor diagnosed tuberculosis, a common disease at that time, especially among the poorest. "You can't stay here," the doctor told my mother after examining Olivia. "The disease is very contagious, especially for children." Olivia, pale and thin in bed, insisted that we stay. "Where else would you go?" she asked between coughing fits, but the risk was too real, especially for Tommy, who was always the most fragile of us. Besides, Olivia needed absolute rest, which was impossible with 4 people sharing her small house. With a heavy heart, my mother decided that we should leave. With the little money we had saved and what Ellie earned at the restaurant, we rented a room in a boarding house in the North End, near the port. It was a damp and noisy place, frequented mainly by single dock workers. The room was tiny, with just a double bed and a thin mattress on the floor, a small wardrobe, and a sink. The bathroom was shared with other residents of the hallway, most of them rough men who drank a lot and spoke loudly. It was in this hostile environment that we spent our first Boston winter, an intense cold that penetrated through the cracks of the poorly sealed windows, making Tommy cough all night. We didn't have proper clothes for that climate, so different from the mild winter of Maine. My mother did what she could, asking for used clothes at the house where she worked and mending old blankets that we got from donations from the local church. The worst came when, just a month after we moved to the boarding house, Ellie lost her job at the restaurant. The establishment closed suddenly, without prior notice, leaving all employees without payment and without prospects. Without her salary, small as it was, our situation became desperate. The money my mother earned as a laundress barely paid for the room rent, let alone food and other necessities. It was then that I made a decision that would change the course of my life. One morning, while my mother was still sleeping, exhausted after a particularly heavy day of work, I left the boarding house alone. I had heard that at Faneuil Hall Market they needed helpers to carry goods, clean stalls, and make deliveries. It was heavy work, usually done by older boys, but I was determined to try. I arrived at the market before dawn when the vendors were beginning to set up their stalls. I approached an elderly man with a white beard who was selling fruit, asking if he needed help. He looked me up and down, clearly doubting that a skinny 12-year-old girl could be of any use. "What can a little girl like you do here?" he asked, his Boston accent heavy, sounding strange to my ears. "I can clean, organize, make deliveries, whatever is needed," I replied, trying to appear more confident than I felt. "I learn quickly and work hard." He hesitated, scratching his beard thoughtfully. "And your parents? Do they know you're here looking for work?" I lied, saying that my mother had sent me. The truth is that she would be horrified if she knew. She always insisted that I should study, not work. "Look, girl, I don't have much to offer," the old man finally said. "But you can help organize the fruits on the stalls and make some deliveries nearby. I'll pay you a few coins at the end of the day. If you do a good job, you can come back tomorrow." Thus began my life as a child worker at Faneuil Hall Market in Boston. I would wake up before the sun rose, take the streetcar to downtown, sometimes without paying, hiding from the conductor, and work until noon. Then I would run to school, often arriving late and without having eaten anything but some overripe fruit that Mr. Henderson, the vendor who had hired me, allowed me to take. I hid this situation from my mother for almost 2 weeks, telling her that I was going to school earlier to receive reinforcement classes. But she ended up finding out when a neighbor saw me at the market and commented to her. That night, I faced her fury and her disappointment. "Why, Matilda? Why did you do this behind my back?" she asked, tears in her eyes. "Because we need the money, Mom," I replied, showing the few coins I had saved in an empty cookie tin. "We're not eating properly. Tommy is getting sick with this cold, and you already work so much that you can barely stand." She remained silent for a long time, and I saw in her face the internal struggle between the desire to protect me and the harsh reality of our situation. Finally, she said, "You can continue, but only until noon, and only if you promise me that you won't abandon school." I promised, grateful for her understanding. In truth, I was already thinking about dropping out of school completely. I was very behind compared to the other students. I couldn't keep up with the lessons, and the teachers seemed to have given up on me. But I didn't have the courage to tell her that, not when the dream of seeing me educated was one of the few things that still kept her hopeful. The months passed, and our situation remained precarious. Olivia, unfortunately, did not recover from tuberculosis. We received the news of her death through a neighbor who visited her in the hospital. My mother cried for days, lamenting not only the loss of the cousin who had helped us when we needed it most, but also the fact that we had not been able to be by her side in her last moments. With the beginning of summer, things improved a little. My mother got an additional job as a cleaner in a small hotel, which meant more money, but also more hours away from home. I continued at the market, now working for several vendors. And Tommy, despite being only 10 years old, began selling newspapers on the streets near the boarding house. Ellie, after months of unemployment, finally got a job as a seamstress in a small clothing factory. She had always had skill with the needle, learned from our mother, and this ended up being our salvation. The salary was better than at the restaurant, and the hours more regular. It was Ellie who, a few months later, with her first complete payment, brought the news that would change our lives. "I found a house to rent," she announced one night after we had all returned from our respective jobs. "It's small and far from downtown, in the Dorchester neighborhood, but it's a real house, not a boarding house room." My mother looked at her incredulously. "We can't pay the rent for an entire house, Ellie." "Yes, we can," insisted my sister. "If we put together your salary, mine, and what Matilda and Tommy managed to get, we can pay. It will be tight, but it's possible. And most importantly, it will be our home. Not a place where we're afraid to use the bathroom or to go out after dark." The hope in my mother's face at that moment is something I will never forget. After almost a year living in miserable conditions, the prospect of having a home, however modest, seemed like a dream. And so, in December 1963, we moved to our first house in Boston. It was a simple construction with only one bedroom, a living room that also served as a bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a bathroom outside. But it had a small backyard where my mother soon began to plant herbs and vegetables, and most importantly, it was ours. By the end of that first terrible year in Boston, things were slowly beginning to improve. We had a roof, food on the table every day, and we were beginning to learn the customs and way of speaking of the Bostonians. But the scars of what we had left behind and what had almost happened on that Father's Day remained open. At night, when everyone was sleeping, I would still wake up startled, thinking I had heard my father's voice or Arnold's footsteps. Tommy would still ask when we would return to Maine, to our house with a view of the sea. And my mother would still cry silently when she thought no one was watching. But there were also small moments of joy that helped us move forward, like when we managed to buy a second-hand radio and spent the whole night listening to music, or when a kind neighbor gave us a kitten that Tommy immediately named Fisher in honor of the life we had left behind. Or even when my mother went back to making lace in her rare free hours and discovered that there were people in Boston willing to pay good money for that New England art so rare in the capital. It was a hard life, but it was ours. And more importantly, it was a life where I didn't have to fear the look of my own father or the touches of my own brother. A life where I could sleep without fear of what might happen when I closed my eyes. Looking back, I realized that that terrible Father's Day of 1962 marked the end of my childhood in many ways. I was forced to grow up suddenly, to face realities that no child should face, but it also marked the beginning of a journey that, however difficult it was, led us to a life of dignity and eventually peace. The Boston winter of 1964 was particularly rigorous. The cutting wind that came from Boston Harbor penetrated through the cracks of our small house, making the wooden walls crackle during the night. Tommy developed a severe bronchitis that left us terrified. We had no money for doctors or expensive medicines, so we depended on the teas and homemade syrups that my mother prepared with herbs from the backyard, following recipes she had learned from her mother in Maine. It was weeks of anguish, hearing his cough worsen each day, seeing him lose weight and strength. My mother and Ellie took turns to stay with him during the night, putting warm compresses on his chest when the fever rose, giving him spoonfuls of mullein syrup with honey when the cough wouldn't let him breathe. It was during this period that we met Mrs. Zora, a black woman who lived 2 houses down from ours. She was a healer and midwife, respected in the community for her knowledge of medicinal herbs and healing prayers. When she heard of Tommy's condition, she came to our house bringing a bottle of dark, fragrant syrup. "It's made with propolis, honey, mullein, and other herbs that only I know," she explained, handing the medicine to my mother. "Give him a spoonful every 3 hours without fail, and let me pray over the boy." My mother, raised in the Catholic tradition, hesitated for a moment, but desperation in the face of her son's illness spoke louder, and she allowed it. Mrs. Zora took a sprig of rosemary from the pocket of her apron, made the sign of the cross over Tommy, and began to murmur prayers in a mixture of English and words we didn't recognize, probably of African origin. Then she passed the sprig over his body, from head to toe, always praying. To our surprise and relief, Tommy began to improve the next day. The fever went down, the cough became less intense, and he regained some of his appetite. It might have been the syrup, it might have been the prayer, or simply the natural course of the disease. But for my mother, it was a miracle, and she began to treat Mrs. Zora with a respect that bordered on reverence. From that day on, Mrs. Zora became a constant presence in our lives. She taught us about the medicinal plants that grew in the region, different from those we knew in Maine. She taught my mother to make ointments for wounds, syrups for coughs, teas for various pains, and perhaps most importantly, she became a friend when we needed one most. It was through her that we began to integrate into the Dorchester neighborhood community. She introduced us to other families, invited us to community gatherings, included us in networks of mutual aid that made all the difference for poor people like us. For example, when someone slaughtered a pig, they shared some of the meat with the neighbors. When someone made bread or jam, they sent a portion to nearby houses. This informal system of mutual support was essential for our survival. There were days when, without the soup that a neighbor sent or the bread that another shared, we would have gone to bed hungry. And there were also occasions when, even with so little, we found ways to give back. My mother offering lace to decorate the local church, me helping to take care of small children when their mothers needed to work, Ellie sewing clothes for those who couldn't pay tailors. Despite these small improvements, we still lived on the edge of poverty. Every penny was counted, every expense was carefully planned. We wore donated clothes or those made at home by Ellie. We ate the cheapest and simplest food possible, and we never ever allowed ourselves the luxury of buying anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. School continued to be a challenge for me. The time I spent working at the market affected my studies, and I increasingly felt out of place among the other students. Many came from more financially stable families, had present parents, didn't need to worry if there would be food on the table the next day. The distance between our realities made it difficult to form true friendships. In addition, there was the constant fear that somehow my father and Arnold would discover where we were. This fear never completely abandoned us. Every time we saw a man who vaguely resembled my father on the street, every time we heard the Maine accent that was rarely heard in Boston, we froze in fear. My mother even changed our last name in unofficial documents, using only Cooper instead of Moore Cooper, afraid that they might track us down. We never had news of my father or Arnold again. We didn't know if they had looked for us, if they had given up, or if they were just waiting for an opportunity to find us. Not knowing was in a way as terrifying as the certainty of danger. The only connection we maintained with Maine was through occasional letters from Anna, my older sister, who had stayed in Rockport with her husband. She wrote with care, never mentioning our exact address in case the letters were intercepted. Through her, we learned that my father had been furious with our escape, that he had broken half the house in a fit of rage, and that for weeks he searched every corner of the town looking for us. We also learned that he and Arnold eventually gave up, convinced by neighbors and acquaintances that we had gone to New York, not Boston. This information brought us some relief, but didn't completely eliminate the fear. What if they discovered the truth? What if on some trip to Boston they found us by chance? These concerns weighed especially on me. I began to have recurring nightmares where my father and Arnold found me, dragged me back to Maine, locked me in a dark room. I would wake up screaming, sweating, my heart beating so hard it seemed it would come out of my mouth. My mother or Ellie would always come to calm me, to assure me that I was safe, that no one would ever take me from there. But the truth is that I never felt completely safe. Even years later, even when reason told me it was extremely unlikely that they would find me, the fear persisted, ingrained in my bones, like the cold of the Boston winter. It was in this scenario of daily struggle for survival, constant fear, and small joys that I met Thomas. He worked as a delivery boy for several vendors at Faneuil Hall Market, using a cargo bicycle to take goods to customers around the city. A few years older than me, at 17, he was a quiet young man, of few words, but gentle eyes and hands always ready to help. We began to talk during work breaks, sharing a coffee or dividing a bread with jam on the steps of the market. He also came from a poor family. He had lost his father early and helped support his mother and 3 younger siblings. Perhaps because we shared similar responsibilities, despite my young age, there was a mutual understanding that transcended words. Thomas was the first person outside my family to whom I told the true reason we had fled from Maine. It was on a late afternoon, after a particularly tiring day of work, when he offered to accompany me to the streetcar stop. As we walked, he casually mentioned that he had never met my father, and something in that innocent comment opened the floodgates of my contained emotions. Between tears, I told him everything. Father's Day, my father's and Arnold's intentions, my mother's desperate bluff about the police, our precipitous flight. He listened in silence, his face serious, his fists occasionally clenching when I described the most difficult moments. When I finished, I expected to see disgust, pity, or discomfort in his eyes. Instead, I saw a contained fury and a determination that surprised me. If they ever show up around here, if they try to hurt you again, they'll have to go through me first, he said simply, his calm voice contrasting with the intensity of his words. At that moment, something changed between us. It wasn't romantic love yet. I was too young, and we were both too busy with daily survival to think about dating. But it was a connection, an alliance, a silent promise of mutual protection that years later would blossom into something more. As 1964 came to an end, our situation began to gradually improve. My mother, who had always had skill with lace, began to receive specific orders from rich families who wanted to decorate their homes with that delicate and exclusive art. Ellie was promoted at the clothing factory, going from basic seamstress to responsible for more elaborate pieces, which meant a better salary. As for me, I began to work not only arranging stalls and making deliveries at the market, but also selling my mother's lace to tourists who visited the place. I discovered that I had a talent for commerce, for convincing people of the value of that handmade work, for negotiating prices that were fair both for us and for the buyers. At Christmas that year, for the first time since we left Maine, we had a real celebration. It wasn't anything luxurious. A roasted chicken instead of the traditional turkey, an improvised tree made with dry branches decorated with paper ornaments that Tommy made at school. Simple presents like new socks or a pretty notebook, but it was ours and represented how much we had advanced in such a short time. Sitting around the small table on Christmas Eve, with candles illuminating our faces, because electric light was too expensive to use without necessity, my mother made a toast with glasses of soda. To our family, which lost some parts along the way, but found new ones. To the courage that brought us here, and to the future that will be better than the past. The 4 of us, my mother, Ellie, Tommy, and I, toasted with tears in our eyes, but also with smiles. We were survivors. We had faced the worst that life could offer and were still standing, still together. And that night, for the first time since the terrible Father's Day of 1962, I slept without nightmares, lulled by the feeling that perhaps, just perhaps, the worst had already passed. 1965 was the year that changed everything. My mother insisted that I leave my job at the market and dedicate myself entirely to my studies. It was a sacrifice for the family, but everyone contributed. Ellie working more hours at the sewing factory, my mother intensifying the production of lace, and even Tommy doing small jobs after school. Teacher Leonora was fundamental in this turnaround, offering me reinforcement classes after school hours. "You have potential, Matilda," she said when I solved a math problem that previously seemed impossible. Those words lit in me a determination that I didn't know existed. In 1966, at 16, I entered the normal course to become a teacher. It was Thomas who suggested this career to me after seeing me help Tommy with his lessons. "You have a way with children," he said. "Why don't you become a teacher?" The idea had never occurred to me before, but it made perfect sense. Thomas became my safe harbor. Initially, just a friend from the market, he began to protect us when we learned, through a letter from Anna, that my father and Arnold had discovered we were in Boston. He organized a protection network with friends and acquaintances, alerts in case men with a Maine accent asked about us. At the suggestion of Mrs. Zora, our healer neighbor, we moved to a better house in the Riverside neighborhood of Portland, Oregon. This strategic move would make it difficult for my father and Arnold to find us, even if they were in Boston. Thomas, using his contacts, was the one who found the place. It was in this new house in October 1967 that Thomas officially asked me to be his girlfriend. "I promise to take care of you, respect you, never do anything that hurts or scares you," he said, perfectly understanding my traumas. It was the first time I felt true happiness, not just temporary relief from fear. At the end of 1968, when I graduated as a teacher and got my first job at a public school, Thomas asked me to marry him. We married in July 1969 in a simple ceremony at the neighborhood church. My mother cried with joy. Ellie was my maid of honor, and Tommy, then 16 years old, accompanied my mother down the aisle to deliver me to the groom. With everyone's financial help, Thomas finally realized his dream of opening a small grocery store in the Riverside neighborhood. The business prospered quickly, gaining the trust of residents for its honesty and fair prices. In 1971, we bought our first own house, a modest but comfortable two-story house with enough space for the whole family. The following year, we discovered that my father had died in Maine, a victim of liver cirrhosis. The news came through Anna, who also mentioned that Arnold had moved to the West Coast after my father's death. It was as if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Finally, we could live without fear, without constantly looking over our shoulders. In 1973, our first daughter, Caitlin, was born. 3 years later came Robert. I raised my children with all the love and protection that I myself didn't have in childhood. Thomas was the father I had always wished to have, gentle, present, respectful. Together, we built the safe home I had always dreamed of, where fear had no place. Overcoming in my life was not a single moment, but a series of small victories. Managing to study, becoming a teacher, finding a good man to love, building a family based on mutual respect. Each of these steps took me away from that terrified girl from Rockport and brought me closer to the strong and fulfilled woman I became. Looking back, I see that my mother was the true heroine of this story. It was she who had the courage to shout, "The police are here," on that fateful Father's Day, saving me from the horror that could have been. It was she who had the strength to tear us away from everything we knew and start from scratch in a strange city. And it was she who, despite all the difficulties, never stopped believing that we deserved a better life. Today, at 75, I look out the window of my little yellow house with blue shutters here in the Riverside neighborhood, and I feel a peace that for a long time I thought impossible. Portland, which was once the strange place where we took refuge, has truly become my home. I know every corner, every tree, every change in the seasons that transforms the landscape of Riverside Park, which is so close to here. My dear Thomas left 5 years ago, taken by a massive heart attack while working at the grocery store we built together. It was 45 years of a marriage that taught me that true love exists, that not all men are like my father and Arnold. He left me sweet memories, 2 wonderful children, 5 grandchildren, who are the light of my days, and this house, which although sometimes seems too big for a lone lady, is impregnated with the memories of our life. My daughter Caitlin followed in my footsteps and became a teacher. Today she runs a preschool in the city center. My son Robert inherited his father's entrepreneurial spirit and transformed our small grocery store into a chain of neighborhood mini-markets that maintain the same principle: quality products at fair prices. Both visit me regularly, bringing the grandchildren for Sunday lunches, where there is never a lack of good apple pie, traditional here in Oregon, but which I learned to make with my special touch. My mother, Julia, lived with us until she passed away in 1998, at 84 years old. She saw her grandchildren grow up, met her great-grandchildren, and departed in peace, surrounded by the entire family she helped save on that distant Father's Day. Until the end, she kept her hands busy with lace, teaching the technique to Caitlin and to my daughters-in-law, ensuring that this part of our New England heritage would not be lost. Ellie never married. She dedicated her life to sewing, becoming one of the most respected dressmakers in Portland, with a loyal clientele among society ladies. She lived in her own apartment in the historic center until she passed away in 2014, at 69 years old, a victim of cancer discovered too late. Her departure left an immense void, especially for me, who always saw in her not just a sister, but a second mother, for all the sacrifices she made so that I could study. Tommy, my younger brother, realized his dream of becoming an engineer. He graduated from MIT and today, at 72 years old, even retired, still works as a consultant on large projects. He married Beatrice, had 3 children, and lives in a condominium in the southern part of the city. He comes to pick me up every Sunday to have lunch at his house, a tradition that we have maintained for years. As for my father and Arnold, we never saw them again. After my father's death in 1972, Arnold really went to the West Coast, as Anna informed us. Years later, we learned that he had died in a boating accident in California. I didn't feel sadness, just relief. The shadows of the past finally dissipated completely. Anna maintained contact with us through letters and later by telephone. I never returned to Maine, although Tommy visited a few times, taking his family to know our origins. The photos he brought showed me how Rockport had changed. More touristy, more developed, but still keeping that colorful New England architecture that I remember from my childhood. I retired from teaching 15 years ago, after 3 decades teaching elementary school children. It was a rewarding career, especially because I always had a special care with the quieter, more frightened students. Those who, like me once, carried secrets too heavy for their small souls. How many times did I notice signs that other teachers didn't see and was able to intervene, refer for help, perhaps even save some children from terrible destinies? These days, my routine is peaceful. I wake up early, make my coffee, and sit on the porch to watch the sunrise. On Mondays, I wash clothes. On Tuesdays, I iron. On Wednesdays, I go to the farmer's market to buy the vegetables for the week. On Thursdays, I host my knitting group, the Wisdom Needles. We are 6 ladies who gather to knit, talk about life, and produce blankets and clothes that we donate to senior homes and orphanages. At night, I sit in my blue velvet armchair, a gift from my Thomas on our 30th wedding anniversary, and read or watch television, always with my cat Romeo at my feet. He is my constant companion, especially on nights when memories become more vivid and the past tries, unsuccessfully, to haunt me again. Looking back at the long road that brought me here, I realize that despite everything, I was lucky. Lucky to have a brave mother who shouted, "The police are here," at the exact moment, saving my childhood. Lucky to have siblings who sacrificed their own dreams so that I could realize mine. Lucky to have found Thomas, a man who taught me that male hands can build and caress, not just destroy and hurt. The frightened girl from Rockport transformed into a strong woman, a loving mother, a proud grandmother, a dedicated teacher. The scars of the past are still there, invisible, under the skin wrinkled by the years, but they no longer hurt as before. I learned to transform fear into caution, pain into empathy, trauma into wisdom to help others. Portland welcomed me when I needed it most, and here I built a life that, despite the mishaps, I consider full and happy. A life that proves that it is possible to start again, that cycles of violence can be broken, that love, true love, based on respect, has the power to heal even the deepest wounds. And today, sitting on this porch, watching the robins that made a nest in the apple tree in the backyard, I feel a deep gratitude for having survived, for having persisted, for having found, after so much storm, this safe harbor where I can, finally, rest in peace. My dear ones, who have accompanied me to this point in this journey of painful memories and overcoming, I want to leave with you some words that I have been collecting throughout my 75 years of life. If you are going through something similar to what I experienced, if there is someone in your family, someone who should protect you, but who has become your greatest threat, know that you are not alone. And more importantly, know that it is possible to escape. It is possible to rebuild. It is possible to find peace after the storm. I learned that age doesn't define our strength, but our ability to start each day anew. When I fled from Maine at 12 years old, I thought my life had ended before it even began. But each new dawn brought a new chance, a new possibility to build something different. My wrinkles are maps of survival. Each one tells a story of pain overcome. The years of child labor at the market, the nights studying after exhausting days, the constant fear of being found. All of this left marks, but they are marks that I carry with pride today because they prove that I survived. Life taught me that even in the deepest darkness, our inner light never goes out. Even in the most difficult moments in Boston, when we went hungry and cold, when the longing for home tightened, there was always a small flame of hope burning inside me, refusing to extinguish. I never allowed my dignity to be stolen, even when they tried to take everything from me. My father and my brother tried to take away my innocence, my childhood, my security, but my essence, who I really was, that they never managed to touch. I discovered that we are stronger than we imagine, especially when we think we can't take it anymore. How many times did I think I wouldn't bear it, that it was impossible to continue, and yet I continued. You can too. Time doesn't heal all wounds, but it teaches us to live with them and still smile. The scars of the past never completely disappeared. The occasional nightmares, the startle when I hear a voice similar to my father's, the instinct to excessively protect my children and grandchildren. But I learned not to let these wounds define who I am or control my happiness. My story is not about what they did to me, but about how I chose to respond. I could have become bitter, distrustful, unable to love. Instead, I chose to cultivate empathy, understanding, the ability to perceive pain in others, and do what was in my power to alleviate it. I learned that true strength is not in never falling, but in getting up every time. I fell many times along this journey, when the longing for home was unbearable, when the money ran out before the end of the month, when the fear of being found paralyzed me. But always, always, I got up. Abuse leaves invisible scars, but recovery shows that we can flourish even after the storm. Like a plant that grows between the cracks of concrete, I managed to find my way to light, to growth, to full life. Despite the obstacles, I discovered that my voice, even trembling, has power when I decide to use it. That's why I'm here today, sharing my story, in the hope that it reaches someone who needs to hear exactly these words at this moment. Age has given me wisdom to understand that it's never too late to start over. Whether at 12 years old like me or at 40, 50, 60, it's never too late to say enough, to seek help, to build a new life away from abuse. My experience has taught me that our story doesn't end in the painful chapters. There are always more pages to write, new characters to meet, new adventures to live. Trauma can be a chapter, but it doesn't have to be the entire book. I learned that surviving is a form of resistance, and living well is the best revenge. Each happy day I lived, each genuine smile, each moment of peace, all were victories against those who tried to destroy me. If you know someone who is going through a situation of abuse, don't wait to act. If you see signs, if you notice something wrong, if a child or adult shows inexplicable fear, changes in behavior, isolates themselves, or presents physical marks, seek help immediately. Talk to this person in private. Offer support without judging. Help find local resources such as specialized police stations, social assistance centers, or non-governmental organizations that deal with victims of abuse. Quick intervention can save not only a life, but an entire trajectory. If my mother hadn't shouted, "The police are here," on that Father's Day, if she hadn't had the courage to take us out of that house that very night, my story would be very, very different. Sometimes, a single courageous action can change everything. Share this story right now with someone you suspect might need help. Share it with educators, social workers, health professionals, anyone who might be in a position to identify and help victims of abuse. Don't wait even one more minute, because each moment of hesitation is one more moment of suffering for someone. And if you are the person who is suffering abuse, know that there is a way out of this darkness. You are not alone. There are people willing to help, resources available, the possibility of a different life, free from fear and pain. Take the first step today, even if it's just telling someone you trust what is happening. This first step is the most difficult, but also the most important. Because, my dear ones, what I never told anyone until today is that for years after our escape, I would still hear my father's voice calling my name in dreams and wake up in a cold sweat, unable to scream. And yet, even with this night terror that accompanied me for so long, I managed to build a life of peace and love. If I could do it, you can too. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Grandparents' Tales. I'd love to know where you're watching from, so please leave a comment below. And remember, no matter how dark the night, dawn always comes. This is Grandma Tilly, sending you all my love from my little yellow house with blue shutters. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.